Welcome to the evening service of Immanuel Baptist Church. We'll be singing song number 236, "O Happy Day." And if you all stand when you get there. Oh, happy day that fixed my choice on thee, my Savior and my God. When down this flowing heart rejoice, and tell its raptures all abroad. Happy day, when Jesus washed my sins away. He taught me how to watch and pray, and live rejoicing every day. Happy day, when Jesus washed my sins away. Oh, happy goodness is my love, to Him who merits all my love. The cheerful anthem still is ours, but to that secret shrine I go. Happy day, when Jesus washed my sins away. He taught me how to watch and pray, and live rejoicing every day. Happy day, when Jesus washed my sins away. 'Tis done and great, His actions done. I am my Lord's and He is mine. He drew me and I followed on, charging fast the voice divine. Happy day, when Jesus washed my sins away. He taught me how to watch and pray, and live rejoicing every day. Happy day, when Jesus washed my sins away. Now rest my longing pride and heart, its honestness will sing to rest. Forever from my Lord depart, with Him of every good possessed. Happy day, when Jesus washed my sins away. He taught me how to watch and pray, and live rejoicing every day. Happy day, when Jesus washed my sins away.
Please turn in your Bibles to Mark chapter 7. Mark chapter 7. Most recently, in our study through the book of Mark, we saw how Jesus had to face the Pharisees' scrutiny once again as they took issue with Jesus' disciples eating food without washing their hands. Which according to the elders' tradition, their traditional interpretation of the law, that was defiling to eat with your hands without washing them first. But Jesus silenced the Pharisees. He silenced their complaints by pointing out how the traditions of the elders had become more important to them than the law of God itself. Jesus proved his accusation against the Pharisees by pointing out how their traditions had circumvented the law and forced the people into violating laws of God that carried the death penalty. Specifically, Jesus points out the tradition that holds that if a person made an oath to give to God the honor that was due to his parents, he could no longer help his parents because he had promised to God the honor that was due to his parents. But the law says, honor thy father and thy mother, and whoso curseth his father or mother, let him die the death. The Pharisees' reasoning was that was not to necessarily let a man dishonor his parents, but their logic was, well, you cannot break promises to God. So if you promised to God the honor that was due to your parents, you can't go back on that promise. You cannot help out your parents. Even if you wanted to change your mind, they forced them to stick to their promise when the promise wasn't legitimate to begin with, right? You can't just try to use one law of God to void another law of God. But that's what the Pharisees were doing. They had used one law to make another law of no effect. And so after proving that the traditions of the elders were harmful and not helpful, Jesus explains to those who have ears to hear that true spiritual defilement does not come from physical things. It doesn't come from eating food without washing your hands first. That's not how you become spiritually defiled. True spiritual defilement comes from the evil that is already in your heart. It's not something out there that then contaminates you. You don't start out being pure. You don't start out being holy. What defiles a person is evil residing in a person's heart that then expresses itself in evil expressions, right? Adultery and murder and other things that Jesus mentioned there, covetousness. The true source of defilement comes from the evil that is in your own heart. And this goes back to what Jeremiah said. The heart is desperately wicked. Who can know it? And so this really confuses the disciples, though, because this teaching was against the popular understanding, the popular beliefs of the day, which thought that Jews were naturally undefiled. They were naturally spiritually pure and could only be defiled with contact with forbidden things. But Jesus, he's preparing his disciples and he's preparing the people who are listening with his rebuke to the Pharisees and with his explanation to the people, help them understand that their laws, their rules, their traditions don't make them holy. Because the evil that defiled them lived in their own heart. He's preparing them for what he himself is going to do. They were their own problem and they could not fix it. Jesus was preparing them for the day when they could understand that he was the solution. That he was the solution to their problem. But Jesus was also preparing the disciples for other truths that they would eventually learn. Jesus was preparing his disciples for the truth that the Gentiles were not unclean simply because they thought, simply because of who they were. In today's passage, we're going to see how right after explaining to his disciples the things that they thought made them unclean are not necessarily what makes them unclean, Jesus begins his ministry to the Gentiles. Jesus' ministry to the Gentiles is very short because that's not why he came here. But we're going to see kind of a miniature of Acts chapter 10. So as we're going to look at this passage, we're going to see Jesus' ministry to the Gentiles. We're also going to learn a lesson in faith from a Gentile woman. How true faith humbly accepts the position that God gives you. So let's read our passage. If you'll start in verse 24 of chapter 7 with me here in Mark. And it says, "And from thence he arose and went into the borders of Tyre and Sidon, and entered into a house, and would have no man know it, but he could not be hid. For a certain woman whose young daughter had an unclean spirit heard of him, and came and fell at his feet. The woman was a Greek, a Syrophoenician by nation, and she besought him that he would cast forth the devil out of her daughter. But Jesus said unto her, Let the children first be filled, for it is not meet to take the children's bread and to cast it unto the dogs. And she answered and said unto him, Yes, Lord, yet the dogs under the table eat of the children's crumbs. And he said unto her, For this saying, Go thy way. The devil is gone out of thy daughter. And when she was come to her own house, she found the devil gone out, and her daughter laid upon the bed. As we've been watching Jesus in his ministry, we've seen that lately Jesus seems to be looking for a place where he's not known, looking for a place where he and the disciples can get away from the crowds. We saw him travel with his disciples to a secluded place where they thought they could get away for a break, for a rest. Instead, they find 5,000 people there, hungry and ready to be fed. After that, he sends the disciples out across the Sea of Galilee for Bethany, which was in a different region than he's been in before. But they ended up in Gennesaret after the storm, also a place that Jesus had not really spent much time, but they knew him there already too. And they crowd him in the streets, looking for a healing, just waiting for a chance to touch the hem of his garment. It seems that even the Pharisees were able to find him there, and he has this confrontation with them over unclean hands, which we just talked about. And now it says Jesus has left Gennesaret and went into the borders of Tyre and Sidon, and entered into a house, and would have no man know it, but he could not be hid. He could not be hid there either. Tyre and Sidon are two cities along the coast of what would be modern-day Lebanon. In the Old Testament, these two cities take a prominent role in Israel's history and prophecy. In the early days of Israel's history, Hiram, king of Tyre, was friends with David and Solomon, and he supplied David and Solomon with cedars from Lebanon as David and Solomon built their palaces and built the temple. Hiram supplied craftsmen, he supplied workers, he supplied materials for the construction of the temple. During its long history, Tyre was considered one of the most stable commercial seaports in the region for over 2,000 years. At the height of its power, the merchants of Tyre were considered princes everywhere else. They were extremely wealthy. With half the city and all its wealth protected on a fortified island just off of the coast, they were able to withstand most any attack against them. The Tyre survived for centuries when its neighbors could not, because of its impregnable island fortress and its strong navy. However, Tyre and Sidon would not always be allies with Israel and promoters of the temple. Later in prophetic literature, the pride of the king of Tyre typifies Lucifer himself. God uses the pride of the king of Tyre to exemplify the type of pride that Satan himself had. And because of their pride, God would condemn Tyre and deliver the city over to destruction. Tyre was actually destroyed twice. Once by Babylon, where the land portion of the city was destroyed, and then again more completely by Alexander the Great, who completely destroyed the land portion of Tyre, used the rubble to build a bridge, and attacked the island and destroyed the island as well, slaughtering the inhabitants and enslaving them. In Jesus' day, Tyre was still a large and important port. It didn't have the same political influence. It didn't have the same military strength during its own heyday, but it was still considered an important port, and it was considered part of the province of Syria. So Jesus and his disciples have actually completely left Judea, and they are now in the Gentile province of Syria. Jesus is leaving the land of the Jews, trying to get away from the crowds, trying to find a place where he's not known, And yet, even here, Jesus is still known. Even in the outskirts of a major Gentile port city, Jesus cannot hide. And as early as chapter 3, we see that people are have been traveling from Tyre and from Sidon to find Jesus, to see his miracles. And so even coming to a place where he thinks, well, maybe I can find some peace and quiet here, people already know him. And this is how Jesus finds himself in a situation where he is approached by a Gentile woman who wants him to do a miracle for her. Verses 25 and 26 say, "For a certain woman whose young daughter had an unclean spirit heard of him and came and fell at his feet. The woman was a Greek, a Syrophoenician by nation, and she besought him that he would cast forth the devil out of her daughter." This woman is a Gentile. She's not a Jew. She is not part of the Jewish nation. We see here Jesus in a situation that he has been in, what you would think, countless times before. Someone comes to him with a desperate need. No one else can do anything about it, and asks him for a miracle. But there's one problem. There's one difference between Jesus in this situation being approached, asked for a miracle, than all the other situations he's been in. This isn't just like all the other times because this woman is a Gentile. This woman is not a Jew. She's not part of the people group that Jesus has been sent to minister to. So, what's the problem with this woman being a Gentile, you might wonder? Well, first, the promise of the Messiah was to the Jews, not to the Gentiles. Jesus was the Jewish Messiah, and he still is. And it's by God's grace that God has grafted the Gentiles in and opened up the gospel to all people. But when Jesus came, his ministry was to the Jews. The people group that God had given the scriptures to, the prophecies to, and who could recognize him for who he was, right? The Jews had been theoretically prepared for Jesus' coming. They had been given the prophecies. They had been given all the law and the writings, and they knew about the Messiah, and they were expecting him to show up, and they should have recognized him when he did come. And so Jesus comes to the people who have been prepared to receive him. This woman, being a Syrophoenician, being a Gentile, being outside the Jewish community, is not part of that group that Jesus was sent to. She was not part of the people who were prepared for a Messiah to show up. She is not why Jesus came to this earth, so to speak. Yes, we find out, yes, she is part of the reason why Jesus came to this earth. But his mission was to the Jews. Second, Gentiles were considered inherently unclean. They lived a polluted lifestyle that contradicted the laws of God, and according to the traditions of the elders, the Gentiles were inherently unclean, and you put yourself at risk if you came into contact with them. To the best of their ability, there was complete separation between Jews and Gentiles. And this Gentile woman was defiling the house just by entering, just by coming into the house and finding Jesus. This would have been considered by most Jews very offensive. Of course, what did we just learn in last week's lesson? That the things that they thought were defiling were not the things that were defiling. Jesus knows better. Jesus knows that this woman is not defiling to the situation, but this would have been seen as taboo. This would have been seen as a bad thing to most Jews. Jesus' disciples were probably somewhat in shock at this woman's entrance. And it seems at first that Jesus is not interested in helping her. His response to her plea doesn't seem very compassionate compared to how Jesus responded to other people, including the leper. At least with the leper, he healed him. Even though he rebukes him afterwards, Jesus healed the leper. But Jesus says to this woman, Let the children first be filled, for it is not meet to take the children's bread and cast it unto dogs. Matthew records that Jesus also said, I am not sent, but unto the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So Jesus turns down the woman's request for a miracle. He tells her, you're not part of the group that I've come to minister to. Sorry, tough luck, maybe next time. Let the children be filled first. Jesus compares her to dogs. The type of dog that Jesus is speaking of here is either like a small house dog or a puppy that might have lived in the house till it got older. You might keep a small dog in the house until it gets old enough. Then you kick it out of the house when it can fend for itself. This is a small dog that would be kept in the house, but being compared to a dog is not flattering in any culture. Here, Jesus compares this Gentile woman to a small dog that might have lived in the house, and he compares the Jews to the children that would have lived in the house. And the Jews, they thought of themselves as the children of God, but they referred to the Gentiles as dogs because they were unclean. Jesus' picture is pretty clear. Your status in this household does not entitle you to this kind of treatment yet. And that to us was, wow, that's rather shocking. That seems rather insulting. But notice that Jesus says, let the children first be filled. He's not saying dogs don't get fed. Jesus is saying that the Gentiles would eventually have their turn, right? Which was a revolutionary thought, by the way. It used to be thought that you had to become a Jew if you wanted to receive the benefits of being God's child. Jesus is already hinting at things that would happen in the book of Acts. And in many ways, chapter 7 of Mark is kind of like a foreshadowing of Acts chapter 10. But it wasn't the Gentiles' turn right now. And Jesus is telling this woman that her request is out of turn. Let the children be first filled. This woman has been put in her place. As a Gentile dog, she does not have the right to eat from the table as the Jewish children. So what is her solution? How does she actually acquire a miracle out of Jesus? Through her humility. This Gentile's solution is to humbly accept the position that she's been given and only ask for what she might have a right to expect. Let's read her response. In verse 28, it says, and she answered and said unto him, yes, Lord, but the dogs under the table eat of the children's crumbs. This woman doesn't try to contradict Jesus, doesn't try to demand her rights. She doesn't get offended at what Jesus says. She accepts her position as a non-Jew without the same rights to the table as the Jew. She even uses the same metaphor that Jesus uses. She accepts her place as a dog in this story rather than one of the children. And even as a dog, though, she can expect some crumbs from the table. And this woman, her humility gains her the miracle that she asked for. Jesus is impressed by this woman's humble but witty response. And he said unto her, for this saying, go thy way, the devil is gone out of thy daughter. And when she was come to her house, she found the devil gone out and her daughter upon the bed. Jesus is not hard-hearted. Jesus loves his neighbor. He cares for this woman, even though he tests her faith a little bit more than he tests the faith of others. He still honors her faith. He does not turn her away. However, in the process, he does take the time to make clear the scope of his mission. The Gentiles' turn is coming, but it hasn't come yet. And it can't come till he has finished his ministry to the Jews. Until then, his focus is going to be on the Jewish people. And he makes that clear in this interaction with this woman. But Jesus does not turn away people who come to him in faith. Meanwhile, this woman's humble faith has saved her daughter. But what is humility? Is humility some sort of self-shame or self-abasement? Is humility putting yourself down or thinking less of your abilities than you ought to? No. No. Humility does not deny reality. Rather, humility is understanding your proper place and having a balanced opinion of yourself, your worth, and your abilities. Self-pity or self-abasement that denies your own value or your own abilities, it does an injustice to God. It does an injustice to yourself, and it does an injustice to others. It does an injustice to God because you slander and belittle one of God's servants. And you yourself don't have that right to do that, even if it's yourself. You don't have the right to slander God's servants by, oh, I'm such a terrible person. I have zero value. I will never accomplish anything in life. You don't have the right to do that. You slander God's creation in devaluing yourself. You do yourself an injustice because that self-abasement or that self-pity usually magnifies your misery. It doesn't make anything better to pity yourself, to look down on yourself. And it does an injustice to others because you deny your own worth, you deny your abilities, and it leads you to become uninvolved and self-centered. Someone comes up to you, man, you've got a talent there. We'd love to have you involved with us. No, I'm not really good. I don't have any talents. I'm not really all that great. A false humility hidden under the guise of self-abasement and self-pity, it does everybody a wrong. But so does having an inflated view of yourself. Having pride, thinking that you're better than you are, thinking that you are more important than you are, thinking that you deserve more than you deserve. It does everyone an injustice too. You'll end up wronging others by treating them less than they are, or maybe taking opportunities that they deserve, thinking that I deserve this more than they do. Or you don't think you need other people's help. I am self-sufficient. I can accomplish this on my own. You'll end up wronging God, thinking that you don't need him or thinking that he needs you. Or your pride can cause you harm. Imagine if this Gentile woman had let pride take control of her response. How dare you compare me to a dog? How dare you call me an outsider? I have just as much need as the next person. How can you turn me away? Don't you teach love your neighbor? Aren't I your neighbor? If this woman's pride had kept her from accepting the position that God had given her, she would never have seen his blessing in her life. If she had reacted with pride and with not willing to accept the position that she has in God's plan, her daughter would never have been healed. This woman's humble faith saves her daughter. And later in Jesus' ministry, he would state that if the miracles that he did in the regions of Chorazin and Bethsaida had been done there in Tyre, they would have repented in sackcloth and ashes. This woman's faith left an impression on Jesus. He says, the people there in that Gentile city have more faith than you guys do. If I had done there what I did here, and which Jesus did not do very many miracles when he was there in Tyre, because they were not the people he was trying to reach. But they would have repented in sackcloth and ashes. But that wasn't the focus of Jesus' ministry. That wasn't why he was there to do miracles. He was there to reach the Jewish people and get them to accept him as the Messiah. But the pride of the Jews in those regions kept them from seeing God's blessing in their lives. Their pride was more than the humility of their pride was greater than the humility of the Gentiles. The Gentiles this woman had demonstrated greater humility than the Jewish people. Sometimes our pride can keep us from seeing God's blessing in our lives. When we fail to accept the position that God puts us in, when we refuse to accept the circumstances that God has placed us in, when we disagree with God's point of view on things, when we feel insulted that God tells us it's not our turn yet, that someone else needs help before us. When we place ourselves in a position where we think we are greater than we actually are, and God puts us in our place, and we get offended at that. When we let our pride get in the way of accepting the position that God has for us, we doom ourselves to even more misery. We doom ourselves to not seeing God's involvement. We do not get God's blessing. This Syrophoenician woman's simple, humble faith is an example to us of how we should respond to God's view of our circumstances, to the position that he places us in, the role that he gives us in life. At times, we don't always like what God has for us. We don't always like the role that we have in God's plan. I think it would have been easy for this woman to dislike the role that she had in God's plan. But she accepted the position that she was in. She did not ask for things outside of what she had a right to expect. And as a result, God honored her faith and her humility and gave her the blessing that she needed. And here we see that true faith in God humbly accepts the position that God gives you. Even if you might feel it's undeserved, or even if you feel like, I thought that I would have it better than this. The position that God puts us in is the one that God will bless us in. And when we learn to accept that, we are learning to have true faith in God. Let's pray. Father, thank you for your goodness. Thank you for this lesson. I think sometimes here in America, where we have such a history of value on freedom and equality, we think ourselves better than we are. We think ourselves more than we are. We think sometimes we deserve a better role or a more important role. And when we're put in our place, we don't always like it. But Father, help us to realize that the place that you have put us in is the place that you plan to bless us in. And help us to be willing to accept that. Even if it offends our personal dignity a little bit. Father, you are so good to us, and you do so much for us. And you have so much that you want to bless us with if we accept what you give us. Help us to realize that the honors of God are greater than the honors of this world, and be willing to accept what you give us. In Jesus' name, amen.